Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity Weekly. I'm your host, Fred Cobb, Executive Vice President and CISO here at InfoSystems. And I'm fortunate today to have Garrett Boyd with me. Garrett is on the team. He is one of our cybersecurity consultants and does a lot with the customers that we deal with, just about anything and everything related to cybersecurity. So, Garrett, hello and welcome.
Hey, Fred. Thanks for having me here. Appreciate
it. Absolutely. Appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join me. So for those that have been tuning in regularly, as you know, we've been stepping through the Center for Internet Security, Critical Security Controls, and we're making good progress. We are up to number 8, which we'll be talking about in this episode. It certainly is a very important control, as are all of the controls that we've been discussing. They really help round out a cybersecurity program if you take these and use them as a framework. But specifically today, we're going to be talking about malicious software or malware. Really, malware is a contracted way of saying malicious software. And we've in previous episodes talked about, what is malware? Worms, Trojans, ransomware, all those can fit into the category of malicious software. And Garrett, it's a fair statement to say that when we're out there doing incident response, 9 times out of 10, we're dealing with some sort of malware outbreak. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's correct. And a lot of times it's introduced by the end user with some form of it or another.
Yep, you're absolutely right. An end user might go to a nefarious website accidentally. They may be coerced maybe to go to that site based on some sort of phish campaign. Click here to get your $50 coupon, that kind of thing. Or there may just be a payload in the email itself where there's a picture to click on, a piece of software to run, requesting of credentials. Any of those things can lead to a compromise of the end user, as you just stated. So it's important to companies out there that they take into consideration all the different ways that malware can be introduced into the environment and have as many layers of defense that is reasonable that will protect the environment. Let's just talk for a minute. Again, before we get into the actual CIS control, some of the more recent, more famous, more popular ransomware, malware outbreaks, think about, even in a weapon of war type situation. You recall Stuxnet? Does that ring?
Yeah, Stuxnet.
Yeah, Stuxnet was actually targeted, someone was targeting the Iranian nuclear complex because they were getting close to making some milestones in their development of nuclear capability. And Stuxnet came out, I think it was 2010, 2011. Don't hold me to that. I think it was 2010, but it actually targeted programmable logic controllers inside the the nuclear facilities. And that was a very famous attack that was used sort of as a weapon of war. There's other situations out there. Cryptolocker, can you speak for that just a minute? I know that's maybe mean a lot of things related to ransomware, but talk about Cryptolocker in general.
Yeah, in general, we see this a lot with companies that are being held ransom. Their files are being encrypted on the endpoint. User may have clicked on a link or executed a certain type of malicious software, and now basically it's run rampant across their files and encrypted everything. Usually they get a note, up on their computer saying that, hey, you need to pay a ransom using this Bitcoin account. And the companies, some decide to pay it and some don't. Some that do decide to pay may not get their encryption key back, so they always run that risk. So just a good reason to have good backups, basically, and those processes in place to keep malware from executing in your environment automatically. So certain things like separation of user and admin rights is essential. And a good AV, having that in place, those things are essential for prevention of that type of activity.
Absolutely. And, again, kind of harping on the human element of it for a moment, but we can have all of those things in place, but we can't necessarily fix the human. So that's where we have to continually test, test our workforce, or maybe not continually, but frequently, to make sure that they're getting accustomed to getting phished, because that is a way to introduce malware into the environment.
We'll be back with the Cybersecurity Weekly podcast after we pause for this special message. Security analysts believe cyber attacks will continue to escalate throughout 2020 and are recommending that every company, regardless of industry or size, place immediate focus on cybersecurity training and the tools that will protect you from these attacks. Did you know that you can book a cybersecurity assessment right now with Fred Cobb's team of cybersecurity engineers at InfoSystems? They will help you discover exactly where you are most vulnerable to a cyber attack and make recommendations on how to strengthen your defense in those areas. This is urgent. It's an issue that affects everyone in our community. Visit the InfoSystems website at www.infosystems.biz to request your cybersecurity assessment. Now back to the podcast.
Sure. Yeah, that is a really good point. A lot of times on malware defense, we like to concentrate on, hey, what kind of AV do you have? Or do you have your Windows firewall on? But another great malware defense is your end user. You have them trained up correctly, diligently, and they will become a great malware defense for you just by being able to identify threats, not click on that link, and report it to, the authorities that need to address that.
Absolutely.
It's a little side, but it could relate.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Well, let's just talk about specifically CIS control number 8 is a foundational control. Again, we're talking about malware. There are lots of subparts to CIS control number 8, so we can kind of step through them briefly and talk a little bit about it. But you mentioned just a moment ago about utilizing not just anti-malware, but centrally managed anti-malware or antivirus type solutions. I mean, why is that so crucial?
Well, Fred, it's crucial just so you can have an inside or holistic view of all your agents in your environment or whatever you're managing. You can see threats or different alerts that are being notified to you. You can update all your systems at one time, just from one repository. So it's just, especially in our line of business, where MSP, we have to manage different companies. So we need to have a central managed platform that we can work from. Rather than having to go to each site or VPN into the internal network to get to their on-prem server, we can do everything from a centrally managed cloud site. And I say cloud because you have on-prem servers or antivirus servers, and you have cloud applications, and the cloud versions give you just better insight and the better ability to manage those systems remotely.
I would agree. I mean, there's certainly, if you're maintaining that on-premise or more that traditional AV, if you are doing all those right things, you're in pretty good shape. But I love the new technology with the cloud-based agents. A lot of times, you're not dealing with the standard, heuristic way. I look at it sort of like the sacrificial lamb. In the old days, or even current with the traditional AV. A system gets infected. The AV notices that that system is infected, and based on the heuristics, based on the updates, if it recognizes the signature, it will quarantine that system, it will notify, send an alert. So we're waiting for that system to get infected, right? Whereas some of the more cutting edge, take your CrowdStrikes, take your Cylance, take your Carbon Black, and what sort of that way of the approach, more of that applying some AI, applying some front-end intelligence to what's going on. In a lot of cases, that's a better way or a better approach to preventing outbreaks. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I believe that's a fair statement, and I think the results show it. I mean, some of the biggest companies have those products like CrowdStrike, Cylance, Carbon Black, because they are trusted and they do work in those environments. That this next generation AI-driven platforms, they use complex algorithms to really see what that virus is going to do or what that executable is trying to do, and it'll flag it once it sees, oh, this executable is trying to go somewhere it doesn't need to be. It's trying to change something that doesn't need to change. And it'll stop it dead in its tracks. Versus your heuristic signature base that can be modified a bit, and then all of a sudden it's a new 0 day.
Yeah, absolutely. That is key, what you just said right there, the 0-day threats. I think some of the newer technologies out there are, by design, much more adept at picking up 0-day threats before they can make their way into your environment. So there's, all the things around the AV, ensuring your software is up to date. You already touched on that, Garrett. Appreciate that. Some of the things you can do natively in the operating system that's been around for a while, like DEP inside of a DEP inside of a Windows operating system, where you can control areas of memory where executables are allowed to run, and that can help assist with controlling malware from doing damage if it is or has made its way into your network. So there's some negative things you can do. I know there's another one, just something as simple as a built-in firewall in Windows. You want to touch on that briefly?
Certainly, Fred, that's something that what we often see as well, going out to sites that have been compromised. We go in there and what don't they have on? It's the Windows firewall, just the basic deal. I think the old school thought was to, hey, turn that off. It's going to affect your applications. And maybe it did at that time, but there's been, developments and improvements within that. In order to turning that on is essential in keeping you safe. Also within that firewall, Windows Defender Firewall, Advanced Security, you want to turn on logging as well, just for forensic analysis, post-event.
Yeah, absolutely. And some other things that we would encourage the audience to look into related to CIS Control number 8, things like setting devices to not do auto run of certain programs or when things are started. Make sure that you are, you've already touched on this too, Garrett, trying to centralize your antivirus logging. Because if you don't centralize, think of any business of any relative size trying to do all those individual machines and capture what's happening. And if you don't have that being reported into a central system, it can get out of hand and you can lose management control.
Sure, yeah. If you don't have central logging, you can just almost bet it won't be addressed. It'll be missed.
Yes. And the cool thing is if you've got SIM technology in your environment, most of the popular antivirus type solutions that we mentioned and others out there we didn't mention, you can pipe that into your SIM. So you're not necessarily looking at, oh, here's my central management console for antivirus and here's my console for my SIM technology. You can port what's happening in the AV console into your SIM and get that single pane of glass.
That's right.
Yeah. I guess one of the last things to touch on maybe here would be command line auditing. That's something that can be turned on. How would you do that in a Windows system? You can go into your overall audit policy. In other words, you configure auditing as a thing, and then you go into the audit policy itself, and there's a section in there on audit process creation. And if you tick that box, anytime someone fires up any sort of command line, whether it's a secure shell, whether it's just a command prompt, you get a specific event ID in the Windows logs that shows there's command line things happening. So it's good to note that.
Yeah, Fred, there's also abilities to do it at the endpoint with, let's say, an AV such as Cylance, where you'd be able to turn on script blocking, where you could basically see if PowerShell has been invoked or active scripts are running, whether it be VB or JavaScript or macros enabled. You can either be alerted on it or blocked on it. You can put certain systems where administrators that would need PowerShell have that in a certain zone and policy where they're allowed, and the rest of the users, there's no reason why the receptionist should be running PowerShell. So you could separate that, be alerted on it, or ideally be having that blocked for those users' systems.
That's exactly right. So much we could continue to go on with about CIS Control number 8. It's so important. We see this all the time in our rapid response services. We're out there trying to get containment, and at least, like as we mentioned, 9 times out of 10, we're talking about ransomware variants, other malware that's just a disruptor. And whether it's being used to make money, whether it's being used to just do damage as a hobby, whether it's being more state run type attacks, there's all different reasons why it's out there. So we have to be diligent in our defense of our networks that we're maintaining. But let's go ahead and put the wrap on it today on CIS control number 8. Garrett, I appreciate you hanging out with me again. For those of you out there that are listening, we really appreciate the patronage that you've been providing to us. We're getting lots and lots of hits on our podcast downloads, and it's great. It keeps us stoked about doing more and more of these. So we appreciate your attention and your time taken out of your day to be a part of our podcast family here on our Cybersecurity Weekly episodes. With that, we will wrap it up. Garrett, again, thank you. And everybody out there, we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred.